Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2005 superhero movie titled Batman Begins. Now, Batman Begins was the first part of the Dark Knight trilogy. This movie runs for 2 hours and 20 minutes long. It is directed by Christopher Nolan, who brought back the live action Batman after going on an almost 8 year sabbatical after the disastrous Batman and Robin movie from 1997. It was in desperate need of a new makeover. Did it succeed? Or was it still the same utter garbage from the Joel Schumacher debacle that came out in 97? Well, we will soon find out. It is directed by Christopher Nolan. It is produced by Charles Roven, Emma Thomas, and Larry Franco. The script was written by Christopher Nolan and David S. Goyer. And of course, it is based off of the DC Comics and its founder, Bob Kane, who was the man who created Batman. Okay, the score was done by Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard. The cinematography by Wally Pfister, and it was edited by Lee Smith. And it stars Christian Bale as the Dark Knight himself, Batman. Also joining us was Michael Caine as Alfred Pennyworth, Liam Neeson as Andre Ducard, who also went by the villain name of Ra's al Ghul, Katie Holmes as District Attorney Rachel Doss, Gary Oldman as Lieutenant Gordon, who eventually would be promoted as Commissioner Gordon. We have Cillian Murphy as Dr. Jonathan Crane, who also went by the supervillain alias Scarecrow. We have Tom Wilkinson, who played some kind of mafia leader of some sort. Rutger Hauer, who was a top executive at Wayne Enterprises. We also have Ken Watanabe, who was, I believe, one of the engineers at Wayne Enterprises, and Morgan Freeman, who also was almost like a quartermaster. He almost reminded me of the James Bond character Q. In this, of course, he is Lucius Fox, who was one of the other top employees at Wayne Enterprises. Also, we had Gus Lewis as a young Bruce Wayne, Linus Roache as his father, the late Thomas Wayne, and Sara Stewart as his mother, the late Martha Wayne. Did this movie really live up to the expectations as what we would expect it? Did this kind of like help bring back the live action Batman to its feet after its foundations crumbled after 1997? Well, I gotta tell you the answer to that. You bet it did. Alright. When bat-fearing young Bruce Wayne, played by Gus Lewis, was 8 years old, he had the displeasure to watch his parents, Thomas and Martha Wayne, get killed as they were departing from the premises of an opera house. Obviously, young Bruce Wayne had a fear of bats, and his parents took him to an opera where some of the creatures in this movie happened to be bats. Yeah, nice parents. What were they trying to do? Try to, like, make him, like, face his fear or stand up to his fears or something like that, overcome his phobias? I don't know. Anyhow, because of his deep fear of bats, they decided, okay, if you don't want to be here, we'll take you home. But of course, along the way, they were approached by crime lords who shot his mother and father dead right in front of his eyes. Little did they know that this horrific event would eventually change his life forever, And I don't mean that as in, like as an expression, but actually in literal terms. This tragic event changed the landscape of his psyche, and he would forever hold that grief, hold that anger, that hostility, and that determination. I mean, it left a big gap in his heart, which could never be fully erased, and which will never be fully forgotten. The heartbreak, the sadness, the anger, and the determination is what driven this kid from a meek, scary little kid to becoming to going out and to do something about it. This was the life changing thing that changed his ways of thinking, his ways forever. He became angst with grief and guilt. Plus, he knew something needed to be done about the crime in Gotham City, as corruption, crime, and the evil that manifest the city of Gotham. And one of his missions is to seek revenge on his parents' killer. Obsessed to learn about the loosely free evil lurkers in the city of Gotham, Bruce, played by Christian Bale, takes his training as far off to the Far East, where he goes into deep training only to end up incarcerated. He gets released by a mysterious man named Henri Ducard, played by Liam Neeson, who takes to the Tibetan mountains where he gets trained by Ra's al Ghul, played by Ken Watanabe, who then initiates him to become a member of the League of Shadows Warriors. This is definitely a true origin story of how Bruce Wayne would become the Caped Crusader, the Dark Knight himself, Batman. When he rejects their offer, he returns to Gotham under the guidance of loyal butler and guardian Alfred Pennyworth, played by Michael Caine. He uses his skills that he learned and inherits the technological integrity from his father under the assistance from Lucius Fox, played by Morgan Freeman. He is ready to take on Gotham, but that might be just part of the question. The bigger question is Gotham ready for him? Taking a dead franchise and rebuilding it is not an easy task. However, is taking down a franchise that relied on fantasy elements and making it into a more serious and darker tone going to eliminate the marketing strategy for merchandise that often seems to gel with making a superhero blockbuster movie? Possibly so, but maybe that was the whole point. I mean, in the past, even the Tim Burton, Joel Schumacher live action Batmans, which also, well, Tim Burton's at least, was much more darker, more grittier, and not all necessarily kid friendly. You want the kid friendly stuff, watch the animated stuff. And even those have darker themes too. But the live action Batmans, with the Michael Keatons, well, I'm not going to say Val Kilmer and George Clooney because those are the Schumacher ones. And those movies were shit. But at least, the Tim Burton versions, Batman and Batman Returns, well, those movies were dark and gritty and showed a side of Gotham that isn't, filled with clown-like villains. No, their version of of Gotham is almost like what you would expect to see in an actual inner city life. Where criminals can run around free and literally get away with murder because of incompetence from the higher authorities, higher from the law. And that's what you kind of get when you walk into Gotham. Gotham is kind of like the image of every large American downtown core. Whether you're thinking Chicago, which actually comes the closest to Gotham, whether you're thinking, New York City, whether you're thinking Los Angeles or Detroit or Philadelphia, those cities, you know, it's not exactly the safest places to walk when you're alone. Hell, even Canadian cities like Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver are not exactly the safest places to walk alone at night. Because a lot of criminal activity seems to materialize during those peak hours. So therefore, the city of Gotham is like every possible big city there is out there. Big buildings, lots of people, some good, a lot of bad, a lot of corruption, a lot of evildoers out there. Okay, maybe they're not as, like surreal or imaginative as the villains that you see in a superhero movie, where even they have alter egos. But you know what I mean. Every place you go in the big cities is never a safe haven. It's almost like you have to have eyes in the back of your head because you never know who will creep up from behind you or what he or she will do. It just represents every big city in the United States. That's what Gotham represents. I mean, you could say any big city you like. And you know what? You wouldn't be wrong. Because there really is no right answer and there really is no wrong answer. Any city you say, you're probably right. Me, I think the closest is Chicago. Because of all these big buildings and lots of downtown feel. And one of the things that too, like I mentioned before, like this movie doesn't make you think of Batman as a comic book character. This movie actually has what appears to be a lot more grounded realism to the story. I know this is an origin story of how Bruce Wayne became Batman, but still you get this feeling like you're not living in a comic book world. You're more like living in more of a realistic world where, a lot of real issues seem to come about. It makes you want to forget that we're actually watching a movie based off of a comic book character, but more like a troubled soul in need of our help, in need of our sympathy, in need of our reassurance. This is a troubled person who has experienced maybe one of the worst tragedies that anyone can ever dream of. But instead of just, hiding in a cocoon or hiding from society, no, he's going out and he's trying to put an end, even if it means putting his life at risk. And that's kind of like what this movie is. Is it going to hold back on the selling of merchandise like toys and in mugs and t-shirts. Maybe so, but maybe that's what it was expected. Maybe we're not supposed to be seeing some goofed up, silly looking Joel Schumacher debacle. But also at the same time, we're not looking at an over the top, exceedingly dark Tim Burton. And forget about Adam West and all that little campy stuff with the onomatopoeias and this almost like cartoon come to life type of series that we saw back in the 60s with Adam West and Burt Ward. No, this movie has a more realistic look at a troubled young man trying to go out and do something about the corruption that's manifesting the city, while at the same time trying to overcome his grief, his angst, his anger, and his determination. So when Christopher Nolan stepped on board to direct Batman Begins, he shifted the attention to add a more dramatic effect of how Bruce Wayne evolved to become Batman and was the primary focus, and everything was pure secondary. And I think that's a good thing I should point out. Because in the Tim Burton movie, well, with the exception of the first Batman, by the time you get around to like Batman Begins, Batman Forever, and Batman and Robin, it wasn't about Batman anymore. It was all about the villains. Okay, the first Batman movie was the Joker only. And yeah, he had just as much screen time as Batman. But then by the time you get to Batman Begins, it's been all about the villains. You know, Danny DeVito and Michelle Pfeiffer as Penguin and Catwoman. And hell, even we could throw in Christopher Walken's Max Schreck, who was just as much of a villain in this movie as well. And then you go to Batman Forever, where it's all basically just Two-Face and the Riddler. And then Batman and Robin was basically Poison Ivy and Mr. Freeze, with, of course, maybe even Bane. But that's what it all became with the Burton and Schumacher movies. It was all about the villains and really little to do with the vigilantes being Batman and Robin. So, at least this movie does try its best to focus more on Batman and not very much on the one-dimensional villains that we kind of see in this movie. Maybe by the time you get to like The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, then it starts to become more villain-centered. Christian Bale, who went in full form from his previous film, The Machinist, buffed up to play the more physically intimidating and darkly complex superhero vigilante. Unlike the Tim Burton Joel Schumacher films from 1989 to 1997, the Batman is filled with angst, vengeance, and complexity issues one doesn't envy. We don't envy the situations that he had to put up with. And it's not because we're saying it in vain, but it's because this is just something that might be a bit hard to swallow. Because, let's face it, I wouldn't want any bad things happening to anyone. Even if people were mean to me, I still don't wish bad on anyone. So, the situations that he had faced, it's like, thank goodness none of these things happened to anyone else. And if they did, I'm sorry. A big thumbs up goes to the technical arsenal Batman uses when going into battle. It makes his fight scenes look and feel real and less cartoon-like. It gives a more logical advantage to his fighting skills and not over the top. I mean, like, for example, his Batmobile is a lot more grounded and much more of a believable look than the other, like, silly incarnates of, of the other previous Batman movies. I also liked Christian Bale's Batsuit. Definitely 10 times better than George Clooney's with the freaking bat nipples. Ugh, that annoyed the snot out of me. Sometimes even I can't get it out of my head. Cheap piece of shit. Under the brilliant screenplay from writers Christopher Nolan and David S. Goyer, Batman Begins feels a lot less like a superhero film and plays off to a more serious toned movie in the same vein as a spy espionage film like James Bond or Jason Bourne. The nice thing about the film is that underneath the batsuit, the weapons, the Batmobile, and the cool spy film gadgets, it's still Bruce Wayne, and the man isn't doing service with a smile. He's flawed, has issues and scars, both physical and mental, and while Gotham is rotting in evil, he's risking his life and getting very little thanks for it. And the thing is, he doesn't want your thanks. He doesn't want your praises or to give advice to small kids about the dangers of crossing the street. No, he's not doing that. Let's save it for the old Adam West cartoony like live action stuff that you saw in the late 60s. No, this is a Batman guy who's like the real anti-hero. And you could be an anti-hero without being entirely unlikable. You could still be an anti-hero without getting any, praise or accolades for your heroic efforts. In fact, he just wants to do his job, pay his dues, and be done. And this is just what makes Batman such a unique and very important figure in the superhero films. Unlike a lot of superhero themed movies, Batman Begins focuses on more human decency, being that it goes out of its way to make the character more human and less of a caricature. It also makes the character a part of our world as opposed to the world of the DC comics. It's trying to step out of the comic book type of atmosphere to give it a more realistic thing. If you've never read a Batman comic and yet you've seen this movie, you would probably not even expect it to actually believe that it was based on a comic book. Well, of course, unless you were living on a rock, everybody knows who Batman is. He's a comic book character. But this movie is trying to make you not think of him as a comic book character, but a real, true to life individual who's got flaws, who's got issues, and someone who you can genuinely take sympathy for, even though he probably won't give it back. It also makes the character a part of our world as opposed to the world of the DC comics. And sure, the villains like Ra's al Ghul and the Scarecrow are placed as secondary characters. They're still not treated as afterthoughts. They're still a very big integral part in this movie. But like I said before, this movie is more Batman centered as opposed to villain centered. I mean, Scarecrow has this kind of like device that kind of almost looks like a potato sack with some kind of breathing through thing that could actually make your head explode or something like that. But does toned down villains have a great, newly more sophisticated franchise? Of course it does. Sure, the heavy makeup and the glittery costumes are not present here, but the more simpler looking costumes makes the villains look effective. The Scarecrow's costume is just a plain mask made out of a potato sack which pales to the more gorgeous costume that Batman wears. Now, I'm not saying that this movie is any way perfect, even though I've been praising it most of the time, and the good definitely does outweigh the bad by a long shot. There are a couple of red herrings in this movie. It's not to say that this movie was watered down or pointless, but it's definitely awkward in camera focus. At times, the camera is too close up, or at times, shot in the dark. And the battle scenes tend to become opaque in focus, and even the sound design can be a bit off putting. I mean, the final train scene, though exciting as it is, lacks in contents and sounds just seem to go off kilter at times. You know? But overall, there are different takes on the superhero genre, and it does manage to succeed in keeping things real, and every scene seems to come across as believable. And not even considering or even thinking twice that we're watching a character based off of a comic book. As opposed to the kid friendly superhero movie as marketing tools to sell toys and merchandise, okay, maybe t shirts and mugs, maybe. This reincarnation of the character delves into human psychological issues handled more in a mature fashion. I mean, if heroism is dormant in society, at least we have them on our screen. As long as they're vigilant, honorable, and loyal, I think we could all agree that this movie does succeed on a lot of levels. So therefore, if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would definitely give Batman Begins an 8.5 out of 10. So I highly recommend this movie. It's a great film. It definitely did bring back the Batman live action after it had to be put to sleep for 8 years. But fortunately, thanks to Christopher Nolan, who brought the franchise back, at least we got to see something that has been abandoned from us for quite some time. And I think he did a great serviceable job. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules: be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Red Rider saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.